you know. Okay, so Dr. Yabom Gilpin Jackson is a global citizen born in Germany, raised in Sierra Leone, and educated in Canada and the US, and is a multi-award-winning scholar practitioner in human and organization development, including International African Women of the Year by UK-based Women for Africa, and the prestigious Harry Jerome Professional Excellence Award given in recognition of Black Canadian achievements. In addition to being founder and principal at SLD Consulting, she has served in executive leadership roles within the British Columbia public sector, in healthcare, and a Crown corporation, and is a Simon Fraser University first vice president, People, Equity, and Inclusion. She is currently a BD School of Business Advisory Board member. Yabom is community engaged and has served on a variety of nonprofit boards and is past chair of her international professional association, the Organization Development Network. Her inspiring talk at TEDx SFU is about how to get past disconnection to social change. In addition to many academic peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, her publications include the book Transformation After Trauma, The Power of Resonance, co-editor for the 2022 Palarave Handbook of Learning for Transformation, the We Will Lead Africa book series, and short story collections about global African experiences, identities, ancestries, and destinies. We are so excited and happy to have Yabom with us here today for this really important session. And I am very happy and excited to be passing it off to you, Yabom. So welcome everybody and have a great session.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Leila, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here from whichever coast you're on and for being part of this session, this discussion, and our space here today. As Leila introduced, my name is Yabom Gilpin Jackson. Folks often ask me how to pronounce it. It's Yabom like home. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I will update that for all. And a reminder that as you are comfortable, to please add yours as well so folks know how to address you. We will have breakout sessions today, so please be prepared for that. Again, just want to thank Lila for the introduction and just to say that, you know, beyond all of that, much more than all of that, who I am is a woman in the world, a Black woman in the world that cares deeply about our shared humanity. And that's how I find myself here and find myself having these conversations, teaching, doing research in this space, speaking and doing the work that I do every day. And it's an honor, it's an absolute honor and privilege to be with you as a sector, you as leaders, you as individuals that are doing this work and a part of the community that Corporation Canada supports through the work that they do to make our context here in Canada and globally better, more aware, more conscious, and working more towards a world where anti-racism is centered and much more importantly, that a world where everyone belongs and everyone is part of the circle of human concern, as my friends at the Othering and Belonging Institute will say. And so with that, I am going to get us started by first acknowledging and situating myself. I am joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Kwantlen and Katsi peoples, also living in the area we colonially call Vancouver, which is the land and the territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, among many, many others. I live here in colonially named British Columbia that is home to over 200 First Nations and Indigenous peoples. And for me, that is always a sobering reminder of the scale of work that's still required for me as a newcomer, as an immigrant, as someone who's been a refugee on these lands, coming into this context to be thinking about just the scale of work that needs to be done to continue to restore right relationships with our First Nations and Indigenous peoples. And so with that, I will encourage all of you to also name the territories you're on. Thank you. I see in chat already a couple there. Please do locate yourself in where you are, whether you're local or national here in Canada or global joining in today. Please do locate the territory where you're from, calling in from. It's always important that we locate ourselves, and that that context becomes part of the story that we're weaving together and the work that we're doing as a global community. So I'll invite any and all of you in chat. And I see that comment. There's another Yabum on the call. Nice to see you here. I often joke that there's not a lot of me around, so welcome here for sure. And when I say a lot of me, I mean not a lot of my name. I went to school in the context of Sierra Leone, West Africa, where my family is from. As mentioned in the introduction, I was born in Germany, grew up in Sierra Leone, and lived, worked, played here in Canada for much of my life, more of my life than I did live in Sierra Leone. And so I'm proudly both Canadian and Sierra Leonean. And at the time that I grew up in Sierra Leone, I went to school in the capital, Freetown, at St. Joseph Secondary School. And there were two Yabums in the school, and we were related. The other one was my cousin. So I'm always excited to meet another Yabum. All right. So with that said, in a moment, I'm going to share screen. And I'm just going to ask the first person that I can still see once I share screen, whether you can see it, to make sure we are all on the same page. Give me a second here. I can see you, Leila, and you're saying you can see the screen. Perfect. Wonderful. Give me a second. Yeah. And I'm on the right screen, on the second screen here. So there we go. I may not see all of you, so bear with me, and please follow along. This is meant to be a conversation. It will be interactive, and often I will call the first person I see at the bottom of my screen, so please don't feel called out. If I call on you, it's just to help me move things along, as well as with the ARC team, who I know are in the background also supporting. This is the location of my territories, as I've mentioned, invitation to do yours. For those of you who know or use nativeland.ca, invite you to please use that. I'll ask the ARC team if they can please put that in chat. If you don't know it, please grab that link. It's just a great way, if you don't yet know where you're located, to do that work as well. So why are we here? Why are we here? You all signed up, so you got a bit of a description when you did, and thank you for doing so. There was enough there to call you in to this space. So as a reminder, we are here to talk about anti-racism strategy development, what it means to lead the process and create an anti-racist strategy. So we will start by talking about what an anti-racism strategy is, what an anti-racist strategy is, why create one. And then the question that I often get asked in my line of work is where we'll start, which is, where do I start? It's overwhelming. I'm not sure how to do this work. And that's the intention of this session, is to to start there, help you think through where you might start. And you will see here a proposal for process steps for developing an anti-racist strategy, moving from the current state of wherever you are to the desired future state that you are moving toward. We will then talk about how to sustain such an anti-racist strategy. And at the end of the day, help you think about your first steps in terms of the what, so what, now what of everything you've heard today. It's important to note that this is just one approach. It's one approach that is based on and grounded in the work and expertise that I bring to this space in human development, in leadership and organization development, centering social justice and equity in everything that I have done throughout my career. I will be sharing with you today a version of the culmination of those learnings. And a lot of what I'm also sharing is work that I have published elsewhere, in journal articles or in a book or book chapters. So please know that everything you're hearing today is grounded in evidence, in research, in literature, has been peer reviewed. And I'm also presenting other work from colleagues that have been doing this work long before I was. And I've tried to put little references on the bottom to acknowledge the source of work, but also so that eventually when you have a version of this recording, as you heard, it's being recorded today, but you may also have seen in the description that there are 2 sessions. So I don't believe the recording will be available until after the second session. I say that to also invite you to take any notes you want to take today, but know that eventually the recording will be available. And there'll also be a resource that outlines the process steps you'll see today and sub-steps that we won't go into deeply today for the sake of time. But today we'll give you enough of an overview is my intention and hope, so that you can continue your journey from wherever you are or get started if you have not yet started this journey of creating an anti-racism strategy. So we will start with our space and just some reminders and encouragements and creating this space, because we create this space together. So the high-level agreements that I love to use come from the work on courageous conversations about race. You can see the citation in the bottom there. But in short form and with a bit of adaptation, here are the 4 invitations that I call you into to create this learning space for the next couple hours. Please stay engaged. We are talking about big topics. I know you all know that. But we are talking about big topics and things that have a lot of complexity and a lot of nuance and topics and experiences that need to be held with care. As I mentioned already, you're going to be in breakout groups. Please stay engaged. The beauty, the learning, what we will harvest together in this session will be most meaningful based on the conversations that you have with each other and what you're able to come back and share in the collective. I'm not on the main screen now, but there were a lot of you coming in. There's a lot of us in this space. So all of you are not going to be able to share in this main room, but you will be able to share in a small breakout. We will have at least 3 of them today. So please stay engaged in the conversation. When you come back, I might ask you to please put things in chat. Very encouraged by the chat moving right now. And those of you that have been locating yourselves and the territories that you're located on today. So thank you for that. And please continue to do that as we move through. Please allow yourself to experience discomfort. It sounds like an odd one, but the reality is part of my praxis in the world, my practice, research, and teaching. I really engage in transformative learning and transformative learning methodology. And from that work, I know that in order to learn, we have to experience some discomfort. And it's good discomfort, and that's what I'm inviting you into today. It's the discomfort that pushes us to learn. As human beings, there is the reality of the aspect of us that likes to be comfortable. But there's the reality from the learning perspective that if we're comfortable, it's easy to get stuck in status quo, to not examine our assumptions, to not examine what we believe, and just to hold fast to what we believe and how we've been, because it's just easier. Life is complex and complicated. We all know that. And so there's ways in which we try to make that easier for ourselves. Naturally, we all do it. But to learn and to move forward and to transform and change and grow, which in the other polarity is fundamental to our human development. To do those things, we have to push ourselves. And part of pushing ourselves is allowing ourselves to notice when we feel discomfort and say, I wonder what that's about, and examine it a bit instead of pushing it away in the way that our default would naturally do. To keep us comfortable. So allow yourself that discomfort, lean in. If someone is sharing a perspective that is not your own, hold it and listen, hold it with care and listen, and notice your discomfort and wonder about that and question it and explore it further, which comes to the next point. Exploring those discomforts and those differences, which is where creativity lies, innovation lies, learning and growth lies, requires dialogue and engagement. And many of us have been talking about this idea of safe space to engage, safe space to be able to share a perspective that might be different than what you're hearing or than what you know is normative in society. I'm going to challenge that a little bit and say to you today that I'm hoping this is both safe and brave space. Because for many of us, as a Black woman in the world, as an African in the world, it has not always been comfortable for me or safe for me to speak my truth. But what I have learned and what I know is in those spaces where I have been courageous enough to speak up and to share a different perspective, there has been much in that space for me to learn and grow, as well as for others. Because again, the learning, the innovation, the change is in our difference. It's not in our sameness. And so what I invite you into is to respectfully use I in sharing perspective, in sharing your truth, because that's the simplest way to ensure that you respectfully share your perspective without taking over or shutting down the space for others. Because when we engage in dialogue and we use the royal we, unless we actually mean we, the collective. So please use we when you mean we, the collective. But when we use that in the sense of personal experience, what happens essentially is you shut down conversation because there's an immediate assumption that my experience is shared and collective. If I'm thinking and feeling that way, then we must all be thinking and feeling that way. To an extent, that may be true if you're feeling and thinking something somebody else probably is. However, leave room by sharing your perspective, using I, and letting others share theirs. Here's the most important agreement for our space. Expect and accept non-closure. We will not complete or exhaust everything there is to talk about in terms of anti-racism and anti-racist strategies. My goal is to give you enough, as I said, to get started or to continue your journey from wherever you are, and to allow you enough room to reflect, to dialogue, to provoke yourself, to engage in that discomfort, or just to validate what you already know in a way that helps move you that one step further. So know that we won't complete. You might be in breakouts and get a little bit frustrated because it's almost done and you're coming back. And that's why I ask you to help me. Please, in those breakouts, make room for each other to speak and to engage, etc. So we're going to ride a canoe. I love showing this image because it also helps me move us through. We've done our welcomes. Welcome again. And then we're going to move now to connecting with each other. So momentarily, I am going to get you ready for your first breakout room. And then we're going to spend time in the discover phase, discovering the way things are, talking about an overview, that process for developing your anti-racist strategy. That discover and dream, eliciting people's dream, is sort of the core. It's the guts of any meeting. When you want to have meaningful meetings, feel free to use this meeting canoe. And I just noticed I don't have the attribution and the citation there, but I'll make sure it is on the final version that you have. From a good colleague and friend that I got the absolute pleasure of working with, Richard Axelrod. And Emily Axelrod. So I'll make sure that citation is included in the final version. But this has been so helpful for me in general in terms of framing meetings, strategies, etc. So it's almost a bonus. You could even use this process to develop your anti-racist strategy, but we'll use it to guide us through the version that I will be sharing with you today. So we'll spend a lot of time in discover and dream, and then decide on the end will be the space of what do you do once you've gone through the process to develop a strategy, and we'll attend to the end here today. So let's start by connecting you. You've heard enough from me. What I'm going to invite you to do is go into your first breakout room, in which you will say hello to somebody, share your name and the organization you represent, or or your role in anti-racist strategy development. So I know there's a plethora of roles here today represented here. So just share that by way of locating how you're coming into this conversation. But beyond that, what I ask you to do is also get personal, step out of role, and let's be human with each other and share your hopes and concerns in terms of developing an anti-racist strategy. So go one step further beyond the organization and role you represent. I think that's important in this context. But beyond that, what are your personal hopes and concerns when it comes to developing an anti-racist strategy? Just share those by way of allowing each other to see and hear, and again, that sense of validating what's so for you, and maybe hearing from others and realizing, oh, I'm not alone in this. Remembering, of course, to use I when you mean I, and to share your perspective and allow others to share theirs. So we will go to the first breakout room. I'm going to ask the team for help here. We will put you into rooms of 3s and 4s, no more than 4s, just keeping smaller groups so that you have time to engage in those groups. And we're going to give you a bit of time just to settle in, meet each other, share your hopes and concerns. So you'll have a total of 10 minutes, which means we'll tell you we're closing the rooms in 9 minutes and then bring you back. So I'm going to stop sharing screen. And we're going to get you into those rooms. Thank you. Enjoy your time. We're going to step into the canoe momentarily and start working through a version of how you might do this. Just want to have a sense of what's on your minds. All right. See them coming in. To get help with decolonizing my organization is a hope. The concern, the safety for Indigenous and BIPOC folks doing this work in our organizations. Yep, definitely. A hope, there's willingness and a strong desire to engage in anti-racism dialogue for sure. Keep them coming, just so we get a sense of what's here. And the other thing that will serve is, as we go through, I will respond as I can where I've had experience with some of these, to deepen understanding of anti-racism. Absolutely. Building a concrete strategy that includes both structural change and cultural change. I love that. Keep them coming, and I will keep looking at them folks will have a chance to read through them, getting an idea of how other organizations do anti-racism strategy and how to do this well, a concern, how to measure change, see progress and impact. Absolutely. And to all of these, there are a variety of responses. Some of this matters on your context, all of them really important considerations. So keep them coming so we get a sense. And as I said, as I go through, I'll also look at these on the breaks when you're in your breakout rooms, and I'll try to weave in responses as we go through. So keep those coming. I'm going to make you work again for a minute, because in a moment, I'm also going to ask you to do a poll, which will require that you sign into Slido. So give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen again. And you can see the screen. All right, we have 29. And I will show you the screen. And you can see, given the comment we just had a moment ago, this was cleanly split a third each. I see that practitioners have edged ahead a little bit to 40%, but you can see executive leader 27%, other role 27%. Put those comments in. On who you think the other is, and I'll look those up and share those as well for folks. And a small sliver of internal or external consultants, as in support role to guide process. But as you can see, and as per the comment in chat, it's possible that there will need to be a group, a multidisciplinary group doing this work. Hold that thought. We're going to come right back to it momentarily. But what's important here is often I hear folks say, well, I'm just the, EDI strategist. I'm, just a manager that's been assigned this piece of work. I don't know what to do. I don't think I'm qualified to do it. What I would say to all of you, whether you're the one who's been tapped to do this work or you're here in your leader role, etc., there is a role for everyone in doing this work. There is absolutely a role for everyone. Even in my worldview on leadership is we are all leaders, whether we have formal title or not. We can lead from wherever we are. And as we have evolved, I think, as humanity to more of an understanding of our human ways of being, there's increasing acknowledgement in the leadership community that influence from any role is as important as formal leadership. Now, formal leadership has its place, and you absolutely need formal leaders engaged in the development of an anti-racist strategy. And for those of you who've been on this journey and you've tried doing it without leadership support, you know that gets fraught as well. But the message here is everyone has a role, right? Everyone has a role to play. And in a moment, you can see, in fact, the right answer is you need the right consortium of people coming together to do this work. Do not try to carry it by yourself on your back alone. Please do not try to do that, right? That is the territory for burnout. So I'll go back to sharing the screen here. So with that said, we are going to move on and ride the canoe now into, so how do you initiate this work? How do you facilitate the journey? What does that process look like? And how do you sustain an anti-racist strategy once you have what you think is the right strategy? And I say what you think, because another thing I will say upfront now is create a strategy. Our human brains need focus. And part of why a lot of people do not do this work on developing anti-racist strategies is the fear, some of the concerns that you put earlier, but it's the sheer, I don't know where to start. And this is complex and complicated, and I don't want to step on toes, and I don't want to make things worse. And partly because for many who have not done this work before and don't have a sense of where to start. Without a sense of a roadmap, it's hard to get started. So whatever you create is a map. Maps are meant to get us where we want to go. But you all know there's many ways to get someplace. You'll be on the journey and there's a detour. You'll be on the journey and there's construction somewhere. You'll be on the journey and there's a pothole. You need to go around all of those things. You might have to take a different route. That is all okay. What you need to do is know your destination. And sometimes you have to reroute. So this process that I'm about to walk you through will get you someplace. It will get you one route to get into the place you want to go. What you need to be able to do is to have the flexibility and agility to make the detours, to change the route, to do what you need to do in your context to sustain the journey, which often means iterating and changing along the way. So here's one map based on my experiences that I offer today. And what we're going to do is ride through snippets of these. I'll share some experiences along the way. I'm going to ask you to discuss along the way. But here is one map to get to an anti-racist strategy. Fundamentally, as you can see at the top, I have this big arrow that says engage the organization. I've already made that point. Do not do this. A, do not do this on your own, not even the planning. But B, to be successful, please make sure to engage the organization. And you notice I didn't say there, engage leadership. Engage the organization, which includes leadership, but engage broadly as part of your process so that you get to something at the end that doesn't surprise anybody and that everybody has had a chance to give input into. Fundamentally, from the leadership and organization development and systems change space, we know that people will support what they have a hand in creating, even when the final outcome is not what they wanted. Even when the final outcome is not what they had inputted into the process. And yes, sometimes that means you still have to work with those folks that have different views that dissent from what's happening. But there's been lots of research on this under the banner fair process. Fair process is critical to people. And the only way to get fair process is to engage broadly, right? To engage the organization. And fair process says, even when they disagree, having a process makes it better in the end. People will ultimately accept the outcome. And even when they don't, it will be clear that there's been a fair process. So here's the map. We're going to spend the next bit of time on initiating, what initiating means. That is preparing the organization for a transformation journey. And I cannot say this enough. An anti-racism strategy is a transformation journey. It is not a project. You can plan it like a project for the sake of our brains and focus and getting started, but it is not a project. It's a transformation journey. What that fundamentally means is that it will take time to get there, and then you could get to one horizon and create the next horizon. It is iterative. We always have room to grow and transform, and a transformation journey takes time. The work, though, needs to be done to plant those seeds and to get on the journey and to start moving towards the transformation that you're looking for. So how do you initiate and prepare the organization? You say 3 things there: facilitating the plan, 3 things there, and then sustaining the transformation, 3 things there. And we'll work through each of those, starting with initiating and preparing the organization. 3 points: assign, recruit a team. We already just talked about that. Define what an anti-racist strategy is. You are here. Many of you are signatories to the ARC Hub, Anti-Racist Corporation Hub framework. So my assumption is that you have a sense of what an anti-racism strategy means, but I'm going to quickly walk through again a definition from my lens, as well as remind you of the definitions in the ARC Hub framework that you may have signed up on. And to say that that is the frame, those are the assumptions I'm making as we continue talking then about facilitating the plan and sustaining the transformation. So your 3 steps: assign and recruit a team to do this work, define what an anti-racist strategy is, and determine the purpose of an anti-racist strategy and build awareness about the what and the why. So we're going to go into a bit of detail on especially 2 and 3. But I will say now, and I cannot say enough, often in my life, either as when I was in consulting practice or in my leadership role hats, I see so many times people embarking on strategy, whether an anti-racist strategy, or a broader diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, or organizational strategy, vision for the organization, embarking on that journey without clearly articulating the why. And I can tell you now that that's going to trip you up every time. If people don't know why, their brains literally can't focus, can't settle, and can't find meaning in why they should be doing something. It's how we're wired. We need a why. Okay. So, and then we'll talk about facilitating and sustaining. So we'll come back to that map. Initiating, preparing the organization. You already know that. So let's talk about what is an anti-racist strategy. Here's how I define it for the sake of this conversation and to just give us a focus: an organizational change or development plan. And I'm going to pause there. An anti-racist strategy is not, it's definitely a sub-plan in terms of part of an organization as vision and strategy, part of, say, your diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, which should have plans for addressing other kinds of inequities that we're working towards in our spaces and in our world. So for me, that umbrella of anti-racism and anti-oppression, and you know all the whether it's the protected groups by our various human rights codes, or in general in our context, the work that we're doing to protect vulnerable populations. There's work on anti-racism, there's work on anti-oppression, and generally those are put together under often labeled equity, diversity, and inclusion strategies. But your anti-racist strategy has to be articulated in an organization change development plan. And the reason for me, I anchor it to organization change and development is because that signifies that you're looking system-wide, and again, that you're looking at transformation. You're not doing this as a single project. You're doing it with a systems lens and for the sake of addressing anti-racism in a systemic way, a transformational systemic way. So it is an organizational change development plan to achieve the desired outcome of inclusive excellence and belonging for people of all racial identities, right? So this is about addressing the work we're doing in organizations on anti-racism. Again, in addition to the other work that you might be doing broadly, but focusing here on anti-racism. So with that framing, a reminder of the other framings that anchor that definition and that anchor your work and that are the assumptions that I am holding for this space. I say this because often, especially in this field of work, there's a lot of language. There's a lot of language that seems new to folks that comes out of the social sciences, the applied social sciences. There's been a lot of critique of this language, of various forms of these languages. What I can say to you as someone that's been a scholar in this space and for a while is these are all anchored in evidence, in research. and their terminology that if you've been in the space where social justice movements or studied it or worked in the space, you've been using this language, you know this language. So I'm not assuming it's completely new, but just to make that note that, and many of you are probably dealing with that in your context, where people will say there's all this lingo, I can't engage, etc. Part of the work, of course, is educating people on why understanding the language is important, but also not being stuck in the language in terms of the labeling and limits that it can put on people. So systemic racism, these are all the definitions that are in your RCOB framework, just to name that again. Systemic racism, that is about policies and practices entrenched in established institutions, which result in the exclusion or promotion of designated groups. So exclusion of some, promotion of others. It differs from overt discrimination in that no individual intent is necessary. What I like about this definition, and I want to flag, is it's often difficult for folks to separate the individual from the systemic. So I'm going to say now, often our discomforts come from our individual perspectives, where we're saying, yeah, but I don't like this lingo because I'm not racist, right? Or I don't have racist ideas. Let me put it that way. I don't have racist ideas, or we're feeling the hard emotions, guilt, shame, or anger, whatever the case may be, at the way things are, and so then we personalize it, and it becomes hard to engage sometimes with the systemic realities. I want to remind all of you and encourage you in your work in organizations to really, when it comes to the strategies and plans, remind people over and over again, this isn't personal. It is personal, but it isn't in terms of the strategy. It's about the evidence, follow the evidence, and it's about looking at the systemic reality and creating a systemic plan to make this place better for everybody. Okay, time and again, I found that helping groups flip from personalizing the impact that leads us to systemic racism and trying to dissociate, is the word dissociate from it, reminding folks that this is about the systemic reality helps bring it back to focus why this strategy is needed. So organizational racism is the way seemingly neutral organization policies and systems can create disparities in access and outcomes for Indigenous, Black, and people from historical disadvantaged countries, communities, and people groups. That's my additions at the end there. This is about that reality. Indigenous, Black, and people of color, racialized folks from historically disadvantaged communities who the systemic reality, the data, continues to show have adverse outcomes relative to everyone else. And the reality that our organizations are part of those systems and that we have work to do to change that and to remove those barriers and remove those disparities and inequities. Anti-racism is the conscious, deliberative, and ongoing process of identifying, challenging, and changing the value structures and behaviors that perpetuate systemic racism. It's an approach, it's not an endpoint. And again, as a transformation process, it's something that we do ongoing. It's a useful frame to support organizational change. And you can tell from what I said earlier why I also love this definition, because it anchors anti-racism in an organization change process. DEI, here are the definitions. I won't read them out. Diversity is of course about our people groups, and the range of people groups we have in our organizational spaces. Equity is about those making sure there's equitable access and outcomes. And inclusion is how we choose to culturally engage everyone, right? And so racial equity then is that systemic fair treatment of everyone of all races, and ensuring that we're doing that work so that all are included moving forward. There's also decolonization, which is a frame that we're working through globally, in keeping across the board everything from the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to the work that is happening in previously colonized nations that are still struggling with adverse impacts as a result. There's a collective awareness and grappling and moving to a new normal, a desired future where all are allowed to express their knowledges, their ways of being, and the colonial norm is not seen as the only reality in and through which people must live. Intersectionality, super important. The multiplicity of our identities and the ways they overlap with systems of power to create continued disadvantage or continued privilege. And of course, privilege, which is the unearned social power. I will pause here to say this. In this conversation, my assumption is we all have measures of power and privilege. We all have intersectional identities that impact how we enter this conversation. And it is important, which is why we're doing this work on racial equity, to acknowledge and know that Indigenous, Black, and people of color have borne the brunt of adverse impacts when it comes to dealing with equity and access and outcomes. So the framework that I have now shown you is grounded in also these principles and assumptions. Individual consciousness raising and training activities for individuals in organizations may be necessary, but are not sufficient to produce organizational change. That is why you need an anti-racist strategy. Just providing training, unconscious bias, etc. Nothing wrong with them. They're not enough. They're one-off. They are not an anti-racist strategy or plan. Okay. Organizations are not good anti-racist inclusion or bad racist or exclusive. I will say, if you're on the Zoom room, we have all been socialized into racist ideas. We've all now been exposed to thinking about anti-racism and inclusion and multiculturalism, etc., in the Canadian context, especially. So we're all on a continuum here. We're all learning on that continuum. And we must keep doing that so that we can continue to critique, examine, and remove those things that are not serving us in our organizations, and keep then in, creating that space of anti-racism and belonging for all. The change process needs to be pursued with a clear vision of the ideal end state. I'll say more of that, of an anti-racist multicultural organization in mind. The picture of the real should be derived from an internal assessment process. What is the real evidence and data on which you're basing that strategy? Has to be based on your internal assessment. No matter what is out there, your organization needs to grapple with what is in here. Right? What is out there will no doubt be a reflection of what's in here, but you need your specifics so that you have a specific strategy that addresses your needs, and that will help you better engage the organization and achieve the outcomes that you want. Ownership of the anti-racism process is a key to success, right? It's a process. You need to have ownership, hence why you need a team dedicated, assigned, that is leading this work. The opposite of not having ownership of the process is that it's everybody's problem, so it's nobody's problem, so nobody does it, and it's too hard anyway, and we don't have clarity in the process, so forget it. I'm just going to throw my hands up or try not to think about it and carry on, right? And then lastly, significant organization change in social justice and diversity will occur only if there is someone monitoring and facilitating the process, which is a reflection of the above. So why create an anti-racist strategy? Why do this? I'm going to now have us do an activity to lock on that why, both personally first, and then thinking about how that connects to the organizational piece. It is absolutely critical that you start with why. And this is one place where I tell people, do personalize it. In order to get to an organizational why and get everybody in your organization owning this process, please allow everyone the space and ask people to reflect on why this matters personally and why it's critical that everybody owns and engages in anti-racism work. So start at why. This is just inspiration to start this part of the conversation. This comes from the work of Find Your Why, Simon Sinek. Some of you probably know from their TED Talk on Start at Why. And as a practitioner and writer in the leadership space. But why do you do what you do? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? It is one of life's greatest joys to wake up in the morning, every morning, with a clear sense of why the day matters, why every day matters. This is what it means to find your why. It is the start of an inspiring journey, your inspiring journey. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Start this in finding your why. Start by personalizing it, because then you can lead from that place. So I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to ask you to think about and surface a story from your life that deeply connects you to why anti-racism is important. No matter our identities, our intersectionalities, our positionalities, which is in spite of how we are socially identified, that creates our intersectionality by sex, gender, race. In this case, we're talking about race predominantly, but also all of those intersectional identifiers. No matter how society identifies you, at the end of the day, your positionality is what you choose. It's how you choose to position yourself in society. But in order to grapple with any of that and say, how am I positioning myself to do anti-racism work? How do I want to position myself as a leader from where I am to support anti-racism work? You need to start with why it matters to you. So what is a story from your life to a person, an event, a thing, a trigger, with a quality of nostalgia maybe, that deeply connects you to why anti-racism is important. I'll say to you now that this process is anchored in research and a moment that had a lot of epiphany, energy, inspiration, and continues to do so for me personally. I did the work on my doctoral research, following the journeys of transformational leaders that were Black, African descent leaders that had all experienced significant trauma, social traumas connected to war, armed conflict, the experience of being immigrants, refugees globally. That was long before 2020, and we were all talking about these issues. Following that journey, asking them about their process to becoming transformational leaders, because these were all leaders that people in their communities identified as transformational leaders. I didn't decide they were and tapped them, their communities did. And what was fascinating for me was the moment I realized no matter how much I talked to them in the interviews or followed their stories, they all had this moment that seemed like a pivotal moment. And if I asked them what was the pivotal moment, they told a story. And it's what I then labeled a resonance story. A story, and it was always a story from their past, their lives. It was an interior story. It was not a vision from somebody else. It wasn't an external story. And it became really important as I examined that and talked to them that, visions change. Your organizational vision might change. You're there right now. You're representing that organization. You're doing this work. But your organization vision, meta vision might change. What ought not to change is your commitment to anti-racism. And where you find that is in your internal reservoir. And that's what I learned from these transformational leaders. I have since then engaged with this idea in many, many sectors, in many spaces, in diverse groups, in diverse racial communities. And it has checked out so much so that it is a big part of the book that I wrote on transformation after trauma. So that is the invitation that I'm calling you into, is to try to locate. And you can have multiple resonance stories for different things. But in this case, I'm asking you to locate the story that connects you to anti-racism and the idea of why that is important to you. And over my career, I have heard so many stories from peoples of all identities. It is everything from um, the person that self-identifies as one of the loudest allies I have met, in all shades of allyship, including, you know, loudly saying when, okay, this is a time that I need to step back. So I'm going to say this and I'm going to step back, and you all, here's how I'm going to help, and tell me if I should do it differently. In all the ways that you want an active ally who is in solidarity and doing the work to show up, this individual I would describe them as, who their resonance story is anchored in maybe the unfortunate classic story of watching a playground bully in elementary school, but then suddenly realizing that there was a different quality to this particular bullying incident. Already somebody that couldn't tolerate the bullying they were witnessing, but then realizing it was different. And what was different was the level of hate and the racist language that another child their age in elementary school was using against another. And that was their moment. This leader continues to say to this day, and as they tell the story, they get emotional every time I've heard them tell it, that story has never left them. It's imbued in their mind. As Viola Davis would say, if those of you who have read Finding Me, if you haven't, Viola Davis's book, Finding Me, is a wonderful read in terms of connection to humanity. Viola Davis says, memories are immortal. We have to remember memories are immortal, but we can choose what we do with memory, right? We can choose what we do with memory. And transformational leaders choose to transform the memories that are hard, and they choose to amplify the memories that move us towards more of what we want in the world. So I'm going to stop talking in a moment for a full minute, and I'm only going to give you a minute to journal and free write. Free write the story that has come to mind as you have heard me talking about what is a resonance story. Free write it. Just journal, just jot. It doesn't have to be full sentences. Just write the basics. Just like you heard me explain. What was the setting? A playground. Where was I? Locate time, age, context. What happened? And what was the insight that provoked for you, right? I have many, many, many resonance stories around anti-racism, but the one that will never, never leave me was being in my kitchen at the end of a long day, came home from work. I'm in my kitchen. I'd picked up my kids from daycare, and I had one in after school care, and two in daycare. And I had picked them up, and we're home, and we're around the kitchen table, and we're waiting for my partner and husband to come home, and the kitchen island. And I'm puttering around and doing what I do at the end of the day, chit-chatting. And my back is turned. I'm at the sink, and this voice pipes up. And my daughter says, "Mommy, what do I answer when people ask me where I'm from? And what do I answer when people say things like, I don't want to play with you because I don't want to touch your brown skin?" And there were worse things said in the latter case. I froze at the sink. At that moment, I'd already been doing this work, sometimes unwillingly. I remember the first time I was introduced as an EDI expert on a panel, I bristled a little because that's not the bio I gave them. I got on stage and said, I'm not an EDI expert. I'm just someone who does leadership and organization development and centers EDI and social justice in everything I do. So I had already been doing the work long by that point. And here I was witnessing my 5-year-old who was born in Canada, in Burnaby, British Columbia, having to contend in kindergarten with what her Canadian and Black identity means. That was my moment. That continues to be my resonance moment around anti-racism. No matter what has happened since then or before then, that was my moment. Because I realized standing at the sink, I can deal with this. I'm an adult. I've been dealing with it all my life. But why does this 5-year-old girl, why does she have to deal with it? And I'm there watching her two brothers going, is this what's it's gonna be like? And am I really now that Black mother that has to have these conversations with my elementary school and preschool children? So just like that, what is yours? You're gonna have a moment to tell it in 5 minutes or less. You're gonna be in a circle with no more than 3. So I'm gonna ask the team to put you into breakouts with 3. And you're going to tell your story in 5 minutes or less. The others in the circle, please, you are going to receive that story and you are going to say thank you. This is no judgment space. We are not going to caretake. We're just going to witness each other's humanity. We're going to say thank you, and you're going to go around the circle. And at the end of all 3 of you telling your story, if you have minutes left in the time, just share what was the impact of sharing and listening to others. And when we come back, I'm going to ask a couple of you to share. And then we're going to build on that to the organization-wide and to the next steps of the process. Does that make sense? Cheryl McNamara, I hope I said your name right. I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you heard everything I just said? Yes. Our club friends, I'm going to stop share for a moment and let's get a breakout group going. I'm going to also get the prompt into chat, and a reminder, I'll also put it in the breakout prompt. You are going to have in breakouts, checking the time, you are going to have 15 minutes in this breakout, and then we will go from there. So I'll open the mic here. Would love to hear some reflections, not of the stories, but of the impact of sharing and listening to those stories. What was the impact of sharing and listening to personal resonance stories about the importance of anti-racism? You can put your hand up or you can just come off mute. Let's hear a couple of these. I'm patient, as you can see. Cheryl, go ahead.
Thank you. I think what came up for me is that vulnerability in sharing the story and the trust in terms of how that story will be received.
Yeah.
But it is, again, that discomfort, which you spoke about, how important that discomfort is, right? Because it starts to open up, engage in conversation, learn more about the other person. Usually it sparks another person to want to share as well. So, but I just couldn't not help but sense that vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for stepping into that vulnerability and courage and even voicing that in the collective. Noted and appreciated. And a perfect illustration of where I started when I conceptually say this needs to be safe and brave space. That is it right there, right? Because each of us need to make that choice in the moment as these conversations unfold. And I often say this is also not about vulnerability on demand. It's not about sharing our stories in inappropriate ways that hijack conversations. It's about appropriately sharing conversations at the right time when it matters, and you'll know. You'll know, right? You'll feel that pull, and if it's the right moment, and when it's the right moment, the impact is clear. Like, if anybody's willing to share, would you share what was the impact of hearing another share their story? Not of telling yours, but of hearing. Would someone else like to speak to that, please? And Cheryl, sorry, I'm being a bad host. I forgot to ask you to say what organization you represent.
Cheryl McNamara, Kairos, Canada.
Thank you. Thank you. And I see one comment in chat, Marianne, incredibly humbling and privileged to be trusted to receive the stories. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful, Mary. Even I should have said, if you're more comfortable putting it in chat, please put a few more in chat. The experience has linked me to others. The incredible power of humanizing each other, right? The incredible power of humanizing each other. And the way in which sharing our stories helps us see each other, drop the masks and the the professional personas that we wear, and just see the other human. It is true in organizational life. There's a whole thing called role theory. We see roles. We stop seeing humans, right? We see roles and we engage with people from roles, and we react to people from roles, and we make assumption about the entire comms team or the entire human resources team. I see some of those of you on video smiling. That's what we do. So the way to get away from role theory is to get to know each other, and to humanize each other. One of the experiences I really appreciated in my professional life is I'm also in the roles that support people and culture and support labor leaders and unions. And there's that natural tension, and often reminding each other we're all working to the same end. We want better organizations. We want people in organizations that are happy, healthy, and supported. All of that is once one of them saying, and we had a good relationship already, saying, you know what, I want a one-on-one with you. This is not those let's go have a off the record conversation. I just want to get to know you. I know we're often, speaking from role and we're both doing our thing, but there's a part of me that really wants to get to know you as you. And we sat down and had a informal coffee, beautiful conversation. And I know you know this, it shifts the relationship, it shifts the context. And even when we're still working through hard things, there's a way in which from that moment, I felt that person saw me and not necessarily the role. And before then, even though they were like, oh, I've really always appreciated this and that, I wasn't seeing the appreciation. I was also only seeing the role that they were speaking from. So these things are important. So we don't see the share screen there. That's because I didn't share screen. I wanted to see tiles and faces and names for a moment. So with that, I am going to share screen for a few minutes, and then I'm going to send you in a stretch break, and then we'll come for the last hour and go through the rest of the process. So give me a moment. I will reshare my screen. And who can I see? Cheryl, I can still see you. Can you see? Yeah, awesome. All right, where are we? We're here. So why did I just make you do that? Why is this important? I've given you some reasons. But fundamentally, anchoring to your why anchors you to this work in a way that nothing else can. Once you've done that, in terms of our process, you just had number 3 that said, basically find the why and build awareness out of it. But some of what comes out of finding your why, when there's more time and space, and when I run this process more formally, what you'd be doing is getting people to individually surface the why. In your context, some of you might be used to circle conversations, other of you might not be. Other of you might have more of an environment where it's you give people reflection questions and let them take it away. Maybe there's not enough safety and trust to have that brave space yet. Either way, you move from letting people reflect on their personal why because what I have learned and what my research on this has shown is the thing that comes really quickly out of a personal why is purpose, and purpose is an organization and collective why, right? I use this syntax again, which is why I use Simon Sinek's poem in the beginning just to anchor to this as well, because it's the simplest one I've found for articulating purpose, right? When people move from resonance and their personal why, the first thing that they want to do, and even with those leaders I spoke to, because this happened, because of this story, I then decided that my life's work is going to be to create leadership impact so that people and organizations are transformed, right? To inspire people to leadership action so that people and organizations are transformed, right? For me, I want to inspire leaders everywhere so that everyone has an awareness of anti-racism. Everyone knows at least something they can do so that we make this world a better place where everyone belongs. And I'm doing it right now. That is why I do these kinds of sessions. That is my purpose, right? And so the invitation would be for you to take this away, work on your personal why. And now you're going, but we're talking about organizational strategy. That's because personal why is then very easy to move from to organizational strategy. So if you were facilitating the actual strategy process, you get people to reflect on personal why. You don't ask them to share the stories. In some contexts where people are comfortable, I have had leaders elect and say, you know what? We will share our resonant stories because we want people to see us. And a circle of leaders sat on a stage and shared their stories. There wasn't a dry eye in the room afterwards. But then we moved from that to say, that's their story, you have yours. Everybody surface and talk about yours. They did that in circles, just like you just did in Breakout. We reflected on the impact of that. And then we said, how do we move from this to organizational purpose? What do we want with anti-racism EDI strategy? And people surfaced ideas. We put those up on a big wall, got analysts working on those, and out came an organizational why. We tested that why. We got people to vote up and down what they liked. I think there were a few versions of the why, and people upvoted them. That was engaging each person personally to reflect on their why, engaging the whole organization to generate purpose statements for the organization, and then selecting the top voted one, which then became the anchor for the rest of the strategy. Does that make sense? Thing about that is once you have that, the rest of your change journey is much easier because inevitably the journey is hard. And at some point, somebody's going to throw up their hands and be like, why are we doing this? Why do I have to do this? To which you say, this is why, right? This is why. And to which you invite them to say, why do you personally care? Why does it matter to you? I know it's been hard, but reflect on that. And what I want as a leader, wherever you are, formal leader or informal leader, is that all of us will come from that personal reservoir, that place where nobody can take that away from you. And with that energy, let's get back to the work. I know it's hard. Let's deal with whatever issue has emerged, but let's get back to the work because this is why we're doing that. Which brings us now to the part in our meeting canoe where we go deeper into discovering and eliciting dreams. We are going to move into that process in 3 minutes because at 10 minutes to the hour, I'm going to send you on a break. That's a lot in terms of the why piece. I'm going to send you on a break and then a 10-minute break, and 10 after we'll come and we'll finish up to the top of the hour, and that will be the end. So in the 2 minutes before I do that, just to locate where we are, we in the meeting canoe, we've welcomed, we've connected to each other in the task, and we've done a bit of discovery. We're going to continue with how then do you discover what the issues are in the organization around anti-racism to build your plan around? How then do you discover what's the ideal that you want to move towards in terms of the future state? And then how do you sustain the journey? So we've done or shared some ideas on 1, on 2, on 3, and how to go from personal to organizational. And then I'm just going to comment on this build awareness piece before you go on your break. To build awareness, once you have your why, what do you do with it to finish preparing the organization before you go into facilitating the plan? What you do with it is, 1, you communicate the why, and in the more detailed resource that you will get eventually, these sub-steps will be there. But once you have your why, to build awareness, you communicate that why, you identify change agents. So beyond the small team that's working on it, you look across the organization and you say, hey, where are the change agents? Where are the people that are so passionate about this work they can be our ambassadors across the organization? And you want to make sure you have change agents that are located strategically across the organization so they can help the process once you get to facilitating it. You want to identify your change sponsor. I said you need that team, you need all the roles. This is where you insist on who is the leadership, executive decision maker and support person behind the scenes supporting that team, giving them legitimacy, giving them decision-making autonomy, or making decisions when they're stuck, or when it requires an executive or corporate lens. That's the person you periodically update. That's the person that approves the facilitation plan. That's the person that you, at stage gates, share things with before they're shared broader with the organization. Okay? Identify your change sponsor, and then prepare the organization. Again, you've communicated the why, but prepare the organization by saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. We're going to come talk to you to assess how we're doing and what the ideal is that you want. Okay? So we'll end there. We'll take a 10-minute break. I will see you at 10 after the hour, 9-minute break. I'll see you at 10 after the hour, and we'll continue. I know folks are back. Okay. So we're back on the map of what this journey could look like. A reminder that this is one process. There may be others, and the idea is that you can take what works from here. You can continue from wherever you are in your journey, and you can move forward from there, or you can start at the beginning, just a map to get you from here to there, remembering what I said earlier about detours and iterations as needed. As we come back, just a quick pause. I'm going to ask folks to put in chat, what are you taking away so far? What has been one thing that has been impactful so far, as we've sort of talked through initiating and preparing the organization? So please, if you can just put in chat, I'll just ask the team to watch the chat for me. Please put some of that there so we can just see some reflections on what is most meaningful right now. Okay. I think I see some folks typing, so I'll let those come in, and I will start preparing us for facilitating the plan. Okay, all right, I see some now. How to get people to individually connect. Everyone has a leadership role to play in the work. I like the principles and assumptions. Important to remind folks, articulating the why and understanding this is a process. That's right. Importance of linking to personal experience to mobilize and connect to others. Beautiful. Keep them coming. By just a way of summarizing, I'm going to go through the next bits. Facilitating the journey. We're here now. You've prepared the organization. You have a team. You have a leadership sponsor assigned. You've articulated purpose. You've shared that. You've built some awareness. Now it's time to define the current state. As we said, with the assumptions, your anti-racism strategy needs to be anchored in facts and in the evidence in your context. But this is also a good time to do that environmental scan to see what's out there. You are all folks that are connected to Corporation Canada and may have already signed the ACORP framework. So you've already sort of connected to yourself to a community to a community where you have access to trends, to information about what folks in the sector are doing, which is a huge piece to help you move forward from there. So you'll go from defining that current state to then, I'll come back to this idea of resonance and resonance stories, to collecting to collective resonance, and then develop and implementing your future state plan. So how do you go about assessing internally? I wanted to offer 3 ideas thinking specifically of your context. But first is this idea of benchmarking your own organization to establish where you think you are broadly, right? And then you go from that broad assessment to a very specific audit. But starting with an assessment, there's many versions of, in general, diversity, equity, and inclusion maturity models. I deliberately I'm going to show you one that's more general first, and then I'm going to show you one that's anchored to anti-racism. But the idea is just to give you a sense of what these maturity models look like, and to give you a sense of what it might look like if you are thinking about your organization and benchmarking your organization, to just get a baseline in terms of where we even at. Because fundamentally, where you are to start is going to inform your anti-racism strategy, and it's going to inform how your plans start and unfold. I have had the range of experience of being in a context that had a lot of maturity, and a lot of our strategy and plans in that context were really about pushing beyond this framework that's in front of you. I'll use the language and then I'll go back and describe it briefly and have you play with it a little bit. But I've been in a context where we really were pushing ourselves in terms of integrated and sustainable. We had done so much work. We had prepared the organization. We had had a basic plan. We had trained leaders, cohorts of leaders. By the time I left that space, the program we had designed to create deep transformational leadership, including examining these kinds of assumptions, was I was transitioning from the organization as we were onboarding cohort 50. 50. So we had done that level of work. It was a huge organization, and there was still lots of leaders to go through. But the impact of having done that level of work was anywhere we found ourselves in that system, people were talking about it. People were using the language of transformation. People were saying, this is not enough. We need to do more. And in some ways, our strategic planning was challenging because nobody was satisfied with status quo or anything that felt contradictory. And of course, the more you do this work, the more you know that you have to deal with the complexities and the polarities, and how do you support everybody? How do you support all ends of the spectrum and everything in between? So we spent forever thinking about how do we move ourselves one step further and not just get comfortable and rest on our laurels. And then I've been in other contexts where we did the work, we went through this process, and at the end of the day, it felt a bit disappointing because what was really clear from engaging the organization is we had to start with basics. So our strategy was very foundational. It was very basic. It was what I would call a 101 strategy. But do you know what? In that context, that's where we needed to start, because it was an organization that was just barely starting to build awareness. So in a broad sense, to give you a picture, and as always, as I said, reference on the bottom, 5 stages of diversity, equity, and inclusion maturity by Ella Washington. It's been used quite popularly since this was published in the Harvard Business Review, is this idea of moving from the first stage, and you know, there's a lot of also things to worry about with stage-based models, right? We're never stuck at one stage. It's iterative. You can go up and down, and so use this, as I said earlier, to help give you focus, but please don't get stuck on it. Use it as focus and guidance, but recognize when things are shifting and shift with it. So you start from that place of basic awareness, right? It's new to my organization and we're just becoming aware of its importance in general. I'm using the broad tent of diversity, equity, and inclusion for a moment. And as I said, you'll see the next one, but you'll see the similarities as we look at a maturity model on anti-racism specifically. Then you have moving from awareness to compliance, the organizations that realize we are in fact out of compliance. The acronym used there, you don't have to worry about. That's in the US context. But from here, it would be realization of, are we even meeting employment standards for accommodation? Are we even aligning with anti-discrimination from a human rights code perspective? What do we need to do to make sure that we are completely in compliance? We have our processes to ensure that we're not discriminating against anyone in any racial group in all of our organization systems. So awareness, compliance. Then there's the tactical, right? It starts getting embedded, but at the level of tactics, not organization transformation. Remember what I said earlier about transformation. At this point, you're really all about, okay, one unit is doing a whole bunch of progressive stuff to move their area forward. Another area is still in awareness, and that's okay. There's sort of a smorgasbord, there's different approaches, and you're still in tactics. And for me, that's mostly the indication of that is mostly when it's not a systemic approach, it's not an org-wide approach, you're still in tactics. And then there's the integrated approach, where it's part of the organization systemically. It's embedded in your org strategy. It's embedded in how leaders think of their performance. It's starting to get embedded across the board systemically. And then, of course, sustaining the transformation. As in any human system, if you don't care for it, if you don't nurture it, if you don't have mechanisms to deal with breakdowns and incidents, those will happen. It's not a question of if they will, it's when they will. And do you have mechanisms? Do you have mechanisms for reporting? Do you have mechanisms for restorative and transformative justice, right? Ways in which to deal with issues before they escalate, right? Which is always the better place to be. Ways to have those one-on-one difficult interpersonal conversations in a way that allows you to see each other's humanity and be with each other where they are, recognize where intent might be different from impact, and where there's been impact, to recognize impact has happened. Healing, restoration is needed as part of transformation. You can't gloss over it and say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't intend it, so you should be okay, right? You have to move from recognition, yes, sharing intent and maybe helping people understand your intention was different from the impact that was created, and that is both individually and systemically, but then also doing the work to repair, to heal, and to move forward, right? So at that point, we're into an integrated approach and a sustainable approach. There's not only an integrated approach, but there's mechanisms to deal with breakdowns. There's mechanisms to iterate, to celebrate successes, and to keep looking for the next horizon, to both maintain the gains that have happened and to keep moving things forward where they might be stuck, and to sustain the work that has been done. So this is a broad approach. What we're going to do is a poll. So for those of you who were already on Slido, go back there. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment and switch us back to Slido, and I'm going to open a new poll for you. I will rate my organization as follows on the 5 stages of DEI maturity. And I'm talking just so I can remind you all, the 3 stages of DEI maturity that I just showed you are 1, aware, 2, compliant, 3, tactical, 4, integrated, 5, sustainable, and of course, they're on the answer key as well. Here you are. Cheryl, thank you for being my support as well as the ARC team. I can see you. Can you see the screen? Thumbs up. Yeah, thank you. All right, here you are. And I will open the mic for a second. Reflections on what you're seeing. 42% say tactical, 35 aware, compliant 12%, integrated 12%, sustainable 0. Reflections on these responses. And I'd love to have someone come on the mic. So unmute to put your hand up. Actually, just unmute because I can't see you right now. So Acting, I hope you're looking. I hope you're looking. Oops. Yeah. There. How are we doing? Anybody coming on to reflect on what you're seeing? See a chat response, lots of space to grow for our organizations. Yeah. And you could see this as a snapshot, right? A sector snapshot as well. I'm thinking about the numbers, Leila. I think we had just about 100 or so, maybe a little over that were registered. And if we just look at 25, so about a quarter of that group who were registered represented here, and saying, you know what, we're mostly at aware and tactical, right? So room for growth, and that's a good problem to have. And more than that, it's a good place to start from to say we must do more, right? We must do more. 12% compliant, 12% integrated. Do the math on the numbers represented here. And if you scale that even to, you know, that 100 as a benchmark, there's lots that our organizations can do. And for me, I often think beyond your context and remember again, the reason I so love doing work and hanging out and being part of the work you're doing in your sector is just the impact, the global impact that you have. So just keeping that impact in mind as part of the purpose and as part of why it is so critical and, in my view, non-negotiable that this work continue and gets done well. And well doesn't mean perfect. It means that we keep going, right? It means one foot in front of the other, keep working that strategy, keep going through the process. Okay, so I'll stop the share on that. And in a moment, I'll get you back to the slides. The reflection, of course, being that getting to integrated, hopefully, well, I'll let you talk about where you want to get in terms of what's your desired future state. But the way to use these assessments, that's what I want to say. The way to use these assessments is to go, okay, if we're at aware, which is the first stage, do we want to take baby steps and just work on compliance? Do we want to make a bigger leap? And do we want to just go right there and start telling people to get to tactical and integrated? For those of us that maybe are at compliance or tactical, do we want to make a big leap and just say, what do we need to be to move this work powerfully forward and then start moving to sustainability? That's why a baseline, an assessment of this nature is important. And that's why it helps with your strategy. So with that said, I'm going to show you a version that is anchored and that has been researched around anti-racism specifically. And then we'll do a second poll really quickly as well. Okay, so an anti-racist or was originally published as a multicultural organizational continuum, but multicultural described in that context, inclusive of anti-racism, inclusive of this idea of embracing the variety of cultural identities and racial identities within organizations, and definitely written and has been published within the organization development and change space. So here's that version. How do you move an organization from monocultural, normative, focused on ideas around racialization and racial superiority to a more multicultural, racial equity, multicultural lens. And by the way, thinking about the comment earlier, somebody who said they really loved the principles and assumptions also came adapted from this work, from colleagues in the organization development space. So this you can see differentiates a tiny bit more. Some of the labels are similar, but the idea here is moving from an exclusive culture, an exclusionary culture, to a club culture, to a compliance culture, to affirming, redefining, and then multicultural / anti-racist. The continuum is like this. Exclusionary are explicitly exclusionary, right? This organization is for this group of people. This is who we welcome here. This is only who we want, and it is actively embedded into policies and practices of that organization. So it's not really even a covert thing. A club mentality is, and a club organization is, well, we're kind of open, and yes, you're probably thinking it. Let's get some token racialized folks, and then let's say, oh, we're not a racist organization. We have a few, look, we have a racialized, indigenous, a Black, a person of color, vice president or executive. We're not racist. Meanwhile, practices and policies, etc., continue to promote the status quo normative culture and white culture. So it's more of a club culture. You're in. If you're acceptable, the other thing is it's looking for acceptable others that can be part of the club, right? A compliance, similar to the other one, is about let's just do the basic compliance, right? So that we are not caught out on discrimination, so that we are not caught out in any way. We're not fully 100% sold or there, and maybe pockets are, but fundamentally it's about let's just get to compliance, right? It's compliance driven. By the time you hit the 4th level of maturity, now we're actually looking at we are here to affirm everybody. Everybody is welcome. It's based into our systems, our policies, our practices, our structures. We are actively measuring, right? We are actually measuring and looking at process and outcome. What are the experiences of people of all racial and cultural backgrounds? What are they telling us? What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? And then you're into redefining. How do we keep redefining ourselves? Because we are listening and we are attentive to the experience of all people, especially our racialized organization members. And then, of course, you're at the ideal state where hopefully this doesn't even need to be embedded in strategies in a particular way. You have to keep nurturing it, but it is the way things are, right? It's not a debate at the leadership tables. It just is. The work is happening, and it is going well. So here's a summary of that. I will just pause and let you digest that for a moment. Something to note about the compliance level is also that you're still at compliance when it hasn't permeated systemically yet. The changes have not permeated systemically yet. Folks, there's still a lot of dissent, a lot of discomfort with this idea of an anti-racism strategy or DEI strategies writ large. So there's still a bit of trying not to rock the boat. And you're starting to see change in terms of anti-racism, but it's in pockets. And often not at senior levels, not at the executive level, not at the board level. Even though, there might be a lot of nodding, but systemically, the organization is not yet reflective of all racial identities, or at least the racial identities that mirror national standards or global standards, etc. Right? Here in Canada, for example, many of you know and are aware of the 50-30 challenge, right? So looking at organizations in your space, are you yet at 50% gender parity, inclusive of all genders, and are you yet at 30% racial and ethnic and other diversities, right? So what does that look like? Okay, so we're going to do another poll. You should have the Slido now. It's still in chat if you need it, and I will just switch to our last poll now. I would rate my organization as follows on the anti-racist multicultural continuum. You should be seeing the poll. I will let you respond to it, and then I will show the results. I would really appreciate folks coming on to comment on what they're seeing on this one. There's a number of reflections I can share on my experience of doing this work, running this poll, but I do want to hear from a couple people on this one. So please come on the mic. We can keep them coming. The screen's up. I never took it down, I realized. But please come up and what are you noticing as you look at these results? I see your comment, Heidi. I see you, Shona. No one identifies the organization as exclusionary. Yeah.
Maybe
Others, please come on. I see, but that's someone from ARC. Yeah, come on.
No, it's Heidi. Sorry, the person who put
Yes.
the 2024 comment. I was reflecting on it also for the thing that we did before. And if I was to imagine where I thought, I don't know, 10 years ago, where we'd be in 2024,
Yeah.
I really would have hoped to see a better picture on the screen.
Yeah.
And so I actually find it a little bit depressing to see like, okay, this is kind of where we are. We're all in such a still like fairly beginner space of moving on anti-racism. And I guess the conversation that we had at the beginning where people shared, our personal whys and et cetera, really brought out to me the urgency of how deeply racism is affecting all of us in different ways, all through society. And it's just, like we really, there are no more excuses. This has got to move.
Yeah. Yeah. And Heidi, sorry, can you identify what organization?
Yeah, sure. I'm with Oxfam Quebec in Quebec.
Thank you. Thank you. Leila, can you help me with the hands? I didn't see the order they might have come up in. I think I see 2 hands are still up.
Yeah, I had my hand up, but I can let other folks go first.
Okay. Yeah.
There was Zainab, Cheryl, and Shauna.
All right. So we'll do those 3 and then we'll do you and then we'll move on. Thanks. Go ahead in that order. Zainab?
Oh, yeah. Well, like I'm representing the Canada Sierra Leone Friendship Society Incorporated, and we are multicultural. And we have, before we became corporates, we have a code, which is a racial code based on the experience of racism. We became a registered corporation. So we both, and the thing of really, it's a question I wanted to ask because I have been in this, the things that I've been observing here, because both in Canada, I'm born and raised in Sierra Leone. Is the war brought me in, and I've been schooling, working here. You can see the websites, or when they call for job chatting, you see everything online. But in the real world, just like, well, they are always saying, oh, in the real world, it's a totally different. The racism is like, especially in Canada, I love Canada, I'm a registered, citizen, but I think we don't have a definition of racism in Canada. Why I'm saying this, because like every day I work with multicultural people, and comparing in America, where people, you will see it to their face if they don't like you, then everybody know. But in Canada, racism, and you advocate for it, you are the victim. They focus on you. So that's why sometimes we just low profile, but our organization, we dealing with racism every day, every minute.
Mhm.
So I don't know exactly what we stand for, because you be advocates, we ourselves, organizations that are working together, they're racist with you because the lineage, like just like they hang the rope on you like a goat or a sheep, then inside they hold the rope, then whosoever come, they draw, say, no, this is not the way. So my question now is, what exactly we stand for and what we can achieve on doing this? Because we've been schooling, understanding, we hearing, and we talk. Sometimes we need action.
Yeah, yeah. And that is exactly what having a strategy and a plan helps you get to. Having a plan to move people from the talk to action, from the what we call in org culture, the espoused versus the enacted values, right? So we're espousing a lot of things, which is the point you're just making. And as Heidi said as well, this is 2024, we're supposed to be further based on what we've been espousing. But what is actually happening is different. And it is true. I'll just speak to the disconnects, and then I'll give Cheryl, Shauna, and Leila the mic, and Laura, I see you as well. I'll just, these will be the last comments we'll take, just so we can close on time. But the comment I want to make about the poll that you just saw is actually, sadly, it's not uncommon for the two polls that we just saw, where in the prior one, the more conceptual, higher one, we say, yeah, we're early, we're just in awareness compliance. But when it comes to really naming where we are, we say, no, we're better. We're well, I'm affirming, even though Heidi, you're saying it's still a depressive picture, but actually what it also shows is the disconnect. The fact that we're saying, well, we espouse that we're affirming, I think we're affirming, but really, on the other hand, when we ask the poll differently at the more conceptual level, at the higher level, it's like, yeah, well, we're just at awareness and tactical. So essentially, we're all saying this is not systemic yet. Because even on the multicultural continuum, anti-racist continuum, nobody, as somebody pointed out, not only put themselves at exclusionary, but the numbers were quite small for being at redefining as well, right? To being at that redefining, or at that, there was a bit more on fully multicultural. But if you look at the pattern of the numbers compared to the first poll, there definitely is a disconnect story there as well. Yeah. Cheryl?
Yes, and that I'm going to build on that as well, Lord. My reaction is it was really difficult, a challenge for me to figure out which one to choose. Because I knew, I mean, we're not exclusionary. We were a club. I remember the days when we were a club. I don't think we're there yet, or I don't think we're there anymore. But where exactly are we? And I can tell you, we want to be affirming, like we want to. It's the tension between where we're at and where we want to go, right?
Mhm.
And
100%.
so that's where it was a bit confusing for me and I could not help but notice the difference in the first or the former poll that we did in this one, and that there was a bit of a disconnect.
Yeah. Hold that thought right there. The tension between where we are and where we want to go. Hold that short thought. Shauna?
Just in response to something Heidi said earlier, I think some of the reason, I mean, I don't know, for me, for some of the reason we're seeing the poll show out the way that it is because we're better identifying that some of the actions done in the past were performative. That we're learning more. We're learning more about the action needs to be substantive. It needs to actually move to change, and and hopefully doing a better job at self-reflecting and being like, okay, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. That weirdly is a good news story.
It is. It is. It's kind of like you put a reporting mechanism in, you're going to get more reports all of a sudden, and then there's the tendency to panic and go, "Oh, like it's worse than we thought." But actually, it always was. People were just not reporting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
that again, that tension between where you are and where you need to go, and that messy in between. Leila, do you want to go now, or you want Laura to go first?
Laura can go first.
Laura?
Yes, perhaps I would have been shocked by this poll, like the first person that did the intervention, like what, in 2024. But we are at that stage in my organization, the Public Service Alliance of Canada, national union representing mostly, but not just federal workers. And we, after decades of denunciation in terms of trying to decolonize our labor movement, what really put gas on the fire was the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, I Don't Know More, the pandemic, right? So we wanted to walking what we're talking, right? Our organization is very strong in the public sphere about anti-racism, and we're supporting historical Black action lawsuit against the federal government. But internally, we are still very much a racist movement as labor in general. And if you look at the history of labor, it was start as clubs, and that's why
100%.
Black brothers and sisters created their own unions. So there's a history there that I learned in the past 4 years that I've been there. And
100%.
we finally got around. It took 10 years, but we finally created an internal anti-oppression bureau, and mainly to address internally. And we renamed the organization, this bureau. It's called Human Rights, Diversity, and Inclusion. Seems that the word anti-oppression was too strong for some folks. So anyway,
You need
we
to know your context.
branding and
Yeah.
then finally this summer, like last month, we started anti-oppression training, mandatory for all staff. And I was shocked at how basic some of my colleagues were. Some people were learning about, Canada is a colonial project, very well and alive colonial project. The history of colonialism, the history of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. I was shocked at the basic level some of my colleagues were, and I tried to be like, breathe, Laura, we're here at basics. So I'm no longer shocked by these polls that we're seeing today. When you actually get to do the work, and I acknowledge the privilege in the sense of being in these spaces for over a decade, the International Solidarity, International Cooperation, humanitarian work, working with our other like-minded people, because at the end, we all want to believe that we are anti-oppression people, and we want to also participate in the decolonization of our international practices. So that access of people like you is a treasure, and I acknowledge that I'm privileged to have access to all the richness and experiences that you all bring, and my own experience. So now I'm continuing with more patience with my colleagues, less aggressive, and accepting that we're all learning, educating, and also addressing my own prejudices that unconsciously are there too, because I am a product of this colonial
system. Exactly.
Myself, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Brilliant. Beautiful. You all are setting me up so well for the close, which I will speed through. Leila.
I think what I was going to say was a little bit between Laura and what Connor shared in the chat. It was about the fact that I think these numbers are always really interested when they're disaggregated by race, because I think because it is, like you were saying, it's more personal than the poll that happened before. A lot of the time we look more to more positive outcomes because we don't want to say, I'm using a club mentality, or we might be exclusionary. And I think that in watching a lot of organizations throughout my career, I think somewhere where a lot of the heat, quote unquote, comes up is when someone's perception and the reality of a racialized person start to clash. And so let's say in a poll like this, non-racialized folks or settlers are saying things like affirming, multicultural, like more of the positive tones. But when we're talking about anti-racism, the racialized folks are saying things like exclusionary and club. When we get into these conversations, it becomes really difficult because it all then stems back to the identifying like negatively in conversations about race being really triggering for folks who are non-racialized. But yeah, I think the first thing that came up when I saw the poll was this would be really interesting to see disaggregated by race, because I think that the numbers tend to be really different when we start seeing the experience of racialized people versus what non-racialized people who, I guess, who in that situation have more power are kind of projecting on the reality.
Yeah, so where are the disconnects? What story does that tell when we look at it disaggregated? Like I said, you all setting, and so here's why I have loved, with all the emotional roller coaster and the journey over the years of doing this work. This is why I have loved this particular process that I've introduced you to today, because the process itself is part of the journey, because we are exactly here. With every comment you just made, we are connecting right now from individual resonance to collective resonance. That's exactly what we're doing. So you're on your process, you're facilitating the journey, you've collected all the data. There's going to be a plethora of responses to that evidence. And I'm using the word evidence, not data. You collect your baseline, do the surveys, do the polls, but the evidence is both the data and the stories. It's the comment that Leila just made about it's the disaggregated, it's what's the stories behind the data that you're seeing, right? It's that you need the quantitative and you need the qualitative, and that's also decolonizing our approach to what is evidence, right? We have based our perception of and what we've been espousing about, we're a multicultural country. Here's all the nations represented in Canada, therefore we're a multicultural country. Well, that's one way to look at it, and that's one data set to look at. But as our other colleague just said, if you go beyond that, if you look at the history, if you actually start disaggregating the data, if you ask those many multicultural folks that that are being fronted as part of the story of Canada, what their experiences are, forget about that. If you ask your indigenous colleagues, the First Nations and rights holders of these lands, what their experiences are, you get a different picture. And unless we're looking at that picture holistically, we are going to create strategies, which is often the case, that don't meet the mark. Strategies that don't actually get us to anti-racism. So you need this moment to help people make sense collectively. You need to hear it all, see it all, hear all the perspectives, and only from that lens. Don't just get the data, think you know what the data is telling you. Collect the evidence. Engage the organization. Remember the meta thing. Engage the organization. Make sure people are part of the process. Give people an opportunity to connect collectively, to get at the collective resonance. We heard it. Heidi just said, man, we have to do better, right? It's 2024. That was a collective resonance moment. Why are we still here, right? Therefore, from that place, you go, okay, what is our desired future? And even what we said about some of it feeling depressive, it's good to know. You need to know where you are. Again, an error in anti-racism strategy development is running too quickly to create a strategy that's not anchored in an understanding of where people are, right? And then, as we heard from Laura, once you start talking to people, or you start building the awareness, or you start putting in the parts of the strategy, whether that's policy change or training sessions or leadership development, whatever the case may be, you start realizing as you hear people's stories, there's a lot more there. Everybody actually has a story connected to these issues, whether they're conscious of it or not. And B, oh, we're only at awareness, or, oh, okay, we're at compliance, but we can build awareness to do better from compliance, right? This is just giving you language to get a sense of and make sense of what seems complex and maybe disconnected. I loved the comment earlier of, yeah, this helps me see what we espouse versus where we're actually at, right? That's what these frameworks and this process is there to help you do. So what is the desired future state? Here are some questions and prompts that you might use. And this requires a lot of planning. So as a follow-up, you can take this, you can journal through it. You can systematically, if you have that small group that have been designated to do this work, this is an exercise you do collectively and carefully. You say, let's validate this assessment. Often when I'm working with groups, I work with that small group, I have them do the assessment. And, you know, we do the collective sense making and collective resonance. And then I say, where do you want to go? And they say, oh, we definitely need to be in redefining. Great. But before you start building a strategy based on moving from awareness to redefining, go ask the organization, go ask people. And often what happens is folks come back and they're like, yeah, maybe let's just try affirming. Because we're all ready, we want to go, but people are not ready. We need to give it a year or two. We need to affirm people, because there was an earlier question in terms of a concern, how to make this safe for Indigenous Black people and color and people of color. Listen to them and realize that if you run too fast, too quickly, and go ahead of the actual experiences, you may create a lot of adverse impacts. You may be exposing folks, racialized folks, to even more harm because you're going to create a lot of visibility of the issues. And if people are not ready to hold the complexity and the emotion that comes with that, then you get all the pushbacks, you get all the challenges, you get all the legal pushes, you get all the letters. And then that just creates a bunch of harm and people will shut down. And when I say harm, I mean psychological harm, I mean re-traumatization. I'm not using that word lightly. And then when that happens, people shut down. And then the very people that this strategy is meant to support, you will find shrinking back and pushing back. So be realistic as people in the sector and leaders doing this work. But what I love about this is also question 4. I want you to be both realistic and aspirational. Even if you decide we're not ready to be at redefining, let's go for affirming. Hold the aspiration of redefining and a fully anti-racist organization in focus. And when I say hold it in focus, I mean make it visible. Make sure it's there every time you're presenting the work. Make sure it's there every time you're talking about it. Make sure you're there to say, look, we're only going for this level right now because that's the resources we have. You heard me say I've done everything from work on a sustainable strategy to really work on leading a foundational strategy. And even in that case, I kept saying, and we have to leapfrog. We have to keep in focus. And all the visuals always had the full vision in focus so that people don't forget it. And what you're doing is you're mentally continuing to prepare the organization that we're not going to just stop at compliance or affirming. We're going to keep going. Okay. And that's how to keep that tension between, as someone said earlier, where we are now and where we want to go. I think often we create a strategy, we do something, we celebrate that success. We're like, oh, we're doing the thing. And then there's no sustainable strategy. So everything plops. And then in a few years, something happens, we get upset again, and then we begin again. But then you're beginning again. You're not continuing momentum, right? So I'll leave these questions for folks to take away, to ponder on. And then I'll just make a few comments about sustaining the transformation, and then I'm going to close. I see some hands still up. I'm going to ask you to put the comment in chat just for the sake of time so that we can end on time. So if you have a comment or question, put it in chat. I won't call people up to the mic right now. So You must engage the organization. You must prepare the organization with these 3 steps. You must facilitate a journey based on these 3 steps that will end with a plan. So once you have the clarity of the future state, the plan falls into place fairly clearly, because you're like, oh, one thing I should have said is to move from your assessment of level of maturity to the actual concrete, well, what do we do? What are the things we need to do? You then need to do an audit, right? That is part of defining the current state. So you can do some assessments. Please do an audit. Now, again, as folks that are part of Corporation Canada and the ARC Hub framework specifically, some of you are signatories, if not all of you, you have that beautiful tool, which is the annual survey, right? Which is the annual survey where you complete it, you get sector knowledge on where people are at, but that is also an opportunity to take that survey and apply it to yourself. And that gives you concrete strategies of why you may be at compliance and you haven't moved further than where you want to be. It's those concrete things that then you need to put into your plan, and that's your strategy. Your strategy is your purpose, it's your current state assessment, and it is your future state plan that is based on your assessment that very clearly articulates, here's what we need to do on policy, here's what we need to do on human resources, here's what we need to do on communications. You have that tool available to you, use it. And again, in the accompanying tool that you will eventually get after the second session that breaks down this picture that you're seeing, that step will be articulated as well in terms of what's in current state, what's in collective resonance, and what is in implementing your future plan. So finally, just to name, we were not going to do this. I'll just show you again one more tool. I'll flash it on the screen. But to sustain the transformation, please don't rest on your laurels. Once you've done a thorough assessment, including an audit, you have a future state plan. What you need to then do is make sure you're working on your leadership. And when I say leadership, I mean writ large in how I framed it earlier, everyday leaders that are committed to doing this work. It's the ambassadors that you have recruited from the team working on this, ambassadors placed all over the organization, and keep equipping them to support, to lead, to bring the scenario so that you know what's working, what's not. And that you're constantly reviewing what are the barriers and bridges? What are the things getting in the way? And someone said earlier, a concern was, how do we evaluate process? That is just something you figure out what to do based on your plan. So your plan, you might have come out with your assessment and your, maybe let's say you use the ARC survey and there's 10 areas that need work or 20, and you decide we can't do it all. So to get us to compliance, let's do these 5. Based on those 5, please have targets and measures of success, quantitative and qualitative. How will we know? Check in with people on their stories, check on the progress, look at the data. But I cannot emphasize enough, this strategy needs to rise and keep being forwarded with evidence, because this is hard work. You're pushing on status quo, you're pushing on power and privilege. Until we're fully there, there will always be folks that are uncomfortable enough to push back. And without evidence, things will fall apart. Okay, so keep going with your evidence. So that is your sustaining the transformation, hold the organization accountable to the evidence. I just wanted to flash this very simple tool. What are your barriers and bridges? You need to know them so that you know how to sustain the transformation. Just do a T-chart or a table just like this and just write them down. What are the barriers? What are the bridges? Bridges are how you're going to go from where you are to where you want to go, knowing that there's barriers under the bridge, but how you're going to bridge over it, bridge across, get to where you want to go. Yeah? What are your barriers and bridges? And we've already talked about how you know you're making progress. So what now what? What I will ask you to do is there's a couple of exercises we've provided today that you can take away and start doing. I'll leave it with the ARC team. They're going to share these slides. The recording will be shared after the second session. It might be this recording, it might be the second session's recording, and there will be an accompanying tool that will go out with that recording. In the meantime, you have a couple of exercises you can keep working with in here. So please do that as your next steps. And a last word and comment here on, we've been talking about the organizational journey, this planning process. That chart that I've been showing you is anchored in my published work in the book referenced on the bottom. So this has been built. This is sort of what I call the practitioner's version, the everyday version. This was as a very academically oriented book. That said, the thing that I wanted to make sure I flash in front of you is, and we've said it a few times, but this is as much an organization transformational journey as it is a personal transformational journey. I love the last comment that we are products of this colonial experiment. I said earlier, you'll hear pushback like, yeah, but I don't have anti-racist ideas. Guess what? We all have anti-racist ideas, right? Just as I shared my resonance story, I will never forget the day that, on the surface, you look at the scenario, it was late at night. Not late at night, it was dusk. I was in a strange city, coming from a conference or something, I can't remember. I'm walking on the street in some cosmopolitan city that is not my own. And I see this man, at least presenting, and looks like a man walking towards me, kind of sauntering a little bit, had, this, my description, empty eyes, kind of odd smile, didn't look fully present. And I crossed the road really quickly and scurried away. Okay, I'm a woman in the world, it's safety. But I got into my hotel room and realized I also crossed the road walking away from a Black man. I will never forget the impact of the shame and the realization that that was 100% part of why I crossed the street. It was not only because it was a man walking towards me at dusk in a strange city, right? We all have internalized racist ideas. And we all have to do that personal transformation work. So I encourage you to remember that, and remember that this work goes in parallel with the organizational work. Okay, and that is the end. I'll invite you to leave one word in chat. Here are my contacts. I know the ARC team will send it as well. The polls are all listed on the slide. I saw that question. I was just looking at the last question. The polls are listed on the slide. So you will have the text that you can use if you want to redo the poll. And I'll add into the slide deck the results from the poll that we just did. So you have the picture of what came out of this session as an example. I'll turn it over to you, Leila. Sorry, right at time, 1 minute over, but we made it.
Thank you so much, Yabom, for such a great session.